At the crossroads of Roman justice, punishment functions not only as a response to wrongdoing, but as a calibrated language through which the city and later the empire expresses order, rank, and belonging. Law in Rome evolves as a living framework that adjusts penalties to status and circumstance, so each sentence addresses the crowd as much as the condemned, teaching onlookers what it means to be protected, to be exposed, or to stand near the civic edge. Rather than improvisation, the system relies on forms, procedures, and known places, basilicas, fora, amphitheaters, so that judgment unfolds in a rhythm citizens recognize. Officials act within bounds set by statutes and juristic commentary. Clerks prepare tablets. Heralds recite formulas. The message is steadiness. A community governs itself by rules that can be seen, heard, and remembered. Across the arc from republic to principate, one consensus fact stands out: penalties vary sharply by legal status. Citizens possess protections the enslaved, and many outsiders do not. And by the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era, the distinction between honestiores and humiliores hardens into a working hierarchy across towns and provinces. The same offense may bring a fine or exile for the privileged and corporal punishment, forced labor, or death for the less protected. Crucifixion is typically placed beyond the shield of citizenship, while exile and financial penalties more often mark those of higher standing. These patterns do not erase exceptions, but they define expectations. Status, then, is not a decoration. It is a structural element that shapes how law meets a body, a name, and a household. A lesser-known detail sits quietly in edicts and inscriptions. Condemnations to the mines at Metalla remove offenders from the civic body and deliver them to hazardous extraction that feeds coinage construction and supply. The sentence combines discipline with logistics, relocating a life into a distant landscape where ore, stone, and darkness dictate the hours. It is punishment by removal and by time. Their labor stretches into months or years, and separation itself does much of the work the law intends, keeping the condemned away from market noise, neighborhood ties, and the ordinary circuits of speech and memory. Such sentences lack the immediacy of public execution, yet they alter the empire's margins and remind observers that the state can assign bodies to the work of its material needs. Even when it destroys nothing at once, Roman punishment refashions relationships between a person and the city, between hands and the minerals that sustain the treasury. Historians continue to debate how prescription and practice align. Statutes and juristic writings present categories, procedures, and penalties in spare, orderly terms, yet the record of cases and provincial life leaves questions open. How frequently are the most dramatic sentences employed? How evenly do rules travel across regions with different customs, densities, and pressures? To what extent do particular magistrates, periods of military strain, or moments of civic anxiety bend outcomes within the lawful range? The archive preserves examples and voices, but not a full ledger. Gaps persist. The uncertainty here is not between law and chaos, but between text and habit. And the distance is filled by ordinary discretion, how a charge is framed, which witnesses appear when a festival fills a town, whether a governor is cautious or stern. Seen from an empire-scale vantage, punishment forms part of infrastructure. The same roads that carry grain, pay, and news also carry summonses and prisoners. Amphitheaters host both spectacle and sentence. Boundary stones and milestones mark the reach of rules as surely as they mark distance. A traveler moving from the misty uplands of Britannia to the dry highlands beyond the Euphrates encounters familiar ritual shapes, accusation, testimony, decision, proclamation, even as local details vary. Climate and season set, tempo winter slows, movement along mountain passes. Summer thickens crowds in urban centers. Provincial assizes rotate with the agricultural year, bringing judgment into markets and along river valleys. Under differing skies and winds, the same gestures recur, and repetition sustains authority more gently than noise could do. Because the state prefers clarity to excess, the visual grammar of punishment remains measured. Crowds gather, but formula governs. Penalties are announced in set phrases, engraved in brief on stone, and spoken in steady voices before the community. The intent is memory and instruction more than spectacle. To affirm, categories reassure the compliant and warn the wavering. Even penalties that remove, rather than destroy, exile, loss of citizenship, confiscation operate in public space through notices, seals, and lists, so that absence itself becomes a visible result. A person can be set apart without being made an object of continuous display. The community still sees the line drawn. Small objects preserve this world of procedure. A wax tablet records sureties pledged by neighbors for a defendant's appearance. A bronze inscription lists municipal penalties for disturbing a festival. A graffito notes a magistrate's edict now lost. These fragments suggest that law is not distant. It circulates in markets and bathhouses, in garrisons and way stations. People learn its contours by watching hearings, repeating formulas, and adjusting daily habits to known risks, avoiding certain acts in certain places, showing caution in seasons when officials sit behaving differently at the edges of a camp than under the porticos of a forum. Law enters memory not through a single event, but through steady contact with places, objects, and occasions. Within this frame, the penalties explored later fit as variations on a theme. Crucifixion appears where citizenship fails to protect. Exposure to beasts aligns with the theater of public assembly. Punishments by fire or water echo ritual categories that treat elements as boundaries. Decimation in the army expresses a distinctly military calculus of shared responsibility. Damnatio memoriae, the removal of name and image, moves judgment into the afterlife of public memory. Ad metalla and other forced labors convert time itself into sentence. Some punishments end a life. Others relocate it, rename it, or strip it of legal clothing. All teach, and in teaching, they maintain an architecture of belonging. If there is a single idea to carry forward, it is that Roman punishment is designed to be seen and remembered without resorting to chaos. The system favors recognizable forms and measured ritual over improvisation. Formulae, posts, seals, and short inscriptions do much of the work. The spectacle serves the sentence, and the sentence serves the idea of a city coherent enough to punish as one. Even where mystery remains, how frequent, how discretionary, the continuity of gestures holds the line between private harm and public correction. Measured against the map, the span is quietly vast. An order pronounced in a provincial basilica travels by courier across mountains and seas to a clerk who enters it in a register. Another is posted on a board at the forum, read aloud by a herald, then carried in memory along streets patterned by shade and sun. The distance is large, but the grammar is familiar, and familiarity supplies stability. Wrongdoing meets a response scaled to status, attentive to category, and legible to bystanders, drawing the community into the work of sentence and recall. Under the same sun that touches harbors, fields, and garrisons, the empire keeps time with its punishments, and the audience, quiet, watchful, learns what Rome expects and what Rome will bear. Crucifixion of slaves and rebels becomes the most notorious image of Roman punishment, both feared and remembered across centuries. It is reserved not for ordinary citizens, but for those outside the protective bounds of full civic standing, especially enslaved people, and those who rise in revolt. The penalty is not meant to be swift or discreet. Rather, it is designed to extend suffering and to display the body in public space, transforming the individual into a warning. Roman jurist writers and later chroniclers note that crucifixion is a servile supplicium, a penalty for slaves. Though rebels and pirates, when stripped of civic protection, may also face the cross, the fact that crucifixion endures for centuries within the Roman world shows that it is more than a mere execution method. It is a ritualized performance of power. The condemned is first scourged, stripped, and led through streets or along roads, carrying the crossbeam or burden of wood that will be fixed to a larger upright stake. The place of crucifixion is chosen not for privacy, but for visibility near city gates, along highways, or at hilltops where passers-by can see. Soldiers oversee the process, ensuring both discipline and order, while crowds gather, some in silence, others in jeers, all in witness. The body raised on the cross is no longer simply a person, but a text the empire writes upon, stating with brutal clarity the outcome of disobedience. A lesser-known detail emerges in the scale of collective crucifixions after major uprisings. In the aftermath of the Third Servile War, when Spartacus and his followers are defeated in 71 BCE, Roman sources report that around 6,000 captured slaves are crucified along the Appian Way, stretching from Capua to Rome. For miles, travelers encounter bodies displayed at regular intervals, a corridor of death that transforms a road of commerce and movement into a landscape of punishment. The display lasts for weeks, perhaps months, as decomposition sets in, and the message reaches not only those present, but generations later who hear or read of it. This use of crucifixion is not only about individual guilt, but about suppressing collective resistance, reminding all enslaved people and their sympathizers of Rome's capacity to answer rebellion with overwhelming spectacle. Historians continue to debate the full dimensions of crucifixion practice. Archaeological evidence is scarce, largely because wooden crosses decay and human remains show ambiguous signs. Only a handful of skeletons with possible nail marks or bone damage have been recovered, such as the heel bone from Gavat HaMiftar near Jerusalem, dated to the 1st century CE, which suggests that nails or spikes are sometimes used, though ropes may also bind limbs. Literary sources describe outstretched arms, upright posts, and various configurations, but whether there was a standard method or wide variation remains uncertain. Questions also remain about the precise duration of survival on the cross. Some accounts suggest days, others imply more rapid death, depending on scourging exposure or the manner of suspension. The silence of the record on these technical details leaves space for ongoing inquiry. On the planetary scale, crucifixion illustrates how Rome integrates punishment into geography and landscape. Roads radiating from the capital form the arteries of empire, carrying legions, goods, and decrees, but they also carry punishment. When bodies line the Appian Way, the very infrastructure that unites provinces becomes a theater of discipline. Hilltops, gates, and thoroughfares turn into sites of legal message. The reach of Rome is not limited to courtrooms or written edicts. It extends into physical terrain, embedding authority into the roots of daily life. For those walking from one town to another, the site of crucifixions binds geography with fear, ensuring that the land itself appears to echo Roman law. In the Roman mind, crucifixion also connects with ideas of dishonor and pollution. The body is left exposed, denied burial rites that in many cultures signify closure and dignity. Cicero describes crucifixion as the most cruel and disgraceful of penalties, unfit for a citizen to suffer or even to hear described. The disgrace lies not only in pain, but in degradation, as the crucified becomes food for birds and spectacle for the crowd. In this sense, crucifixion is an inversion of funeral ritual. Instead of solemn processions and honored remembrance, there is abandonment and obliteration of dignity. The punishment targets identity as much as flesh, seeking to erase honor from memory. Another dimension arises in the legal category of those condemned. Citizens generally are spared crucifixion, though in times of civil war or political upheaval, exceptions may occur. The practice thus reinforces the boundary of citizenship, marking the line between those shielded by Roman law and those who are vulnerable to its harshest expression. This distinction becomes crucial as Rome expands, absorbing diverse peoples into its orbit, some gaining citizen rights, others remaining at the margins. Crucifixion signals where that boundary lies, and in doing so helps define what it means to be Roman. Over centuries, the image of the cross spreads beyond Rome, adapted and transformed by later cultures and religions, but its original Roman use remains tied to law and order. The punishment demonstrates not impulsive cruelty, but a calculated systemic tool to preserve hierarchy. By choosing public places, extending suffering, and targeting, the dishonored Rome ensures that each crucifixion speaks not just to the individual, but to the community at large. It is a pedagogy of fear instructing by example. The empire repeats the gesture across territories from Judea to Britannia, embedding the form within its imperial rhythm. Yet despite its visibility, the practice leaves more questions than answers. How often is it employed in everyday provincial justice? Are large-scale crucifixions rare exceptions, or common enough to be routine deterrents? Did local customs or governors modify the procedure? Archaeology struggles to answer, and texts supply only fragments. The silence itself suggests that Romans did not always dwell on the details. The meaning was assumed, not explained. The absence of evidence challenges historians to reconstruct from echoes, but the central role of crucifixion in law and spectacle remains clear. As one moves through the empire past stone arches, amphitheaters, and markets, the memory of the cross lingers as part of the landscape of power. It is not the only penalty, but it is the most emblematic, reserved for those at the edge of civic belonging, used to crush rebellion and signal absolute control. Rome engraves its authority not only on tablets and monuments, but on bodies displayed to the horizon. That sight, repeated enough times across provinces, ensures that the lesson endures. Death by beasts in the arena, known as damnatio ad bestias, stands as one of the most dramatic and unsettling forms of Roman punishment. It combines execution with spectacle, placing the condemned into a space designed for public gathering and entertainment, where the line between justice and performance all but disappears. From the late Republic through the imperial centuries, amphitheaters across the Mediterranean host these events where wild animals imported from Africa and Asia are set upon criminals, captives, and prisoners of war. The arena becomes not only a stage of blood, but a stage of order, reaffirming Rome's command over people, beasts, and nature itself. Citizens and provincials alike watch as law takes the form of lethal exhibition. Historical sources confirm that damnatio ad bestias is often applied to the lowest strata: slaves who kill their masters, brigands who threaten roads, Christians accused of defying civic cults, and rebels captured after uprisings. The condemned are sometimes dressed in theatrical costumes or tied to posts, ensuring both vulnerability and drama. The fact most often cited is that the Colosseum, inaugurated in 80 CE under Titus, becomes the grandest setting for such executions, hosting days-long spectacles in which human death is interwoven with animal hunts and gladiatorial contests. Inscriptions and mosaics suggest that provincial towns also adapt smaller amphitheaters to similar purposes, extending the practice across Gaul, North Africa, and the eastern provinces. A lesser-known detail lies in the logistics of the beasts themselves. Lions, leopards, bears, crocodiles, and even elephants are transported along specialized supply lines maintained at great expense to the state and wealthy sponsors. Hunting parties in Numidia or along the Nile capture animals alive, transport them by river barges and sea vessels, and deliver them to holding pens near Rome or provincial centers. The presence of exotic creatures roaring in cages before release adds a layer of imperial theater. Not only does the condemned face death, but Rome demonstrates its reach over distant landscapes. The beasts are as much symbols of conquest as they are instruments of execution. Scholars continue to debate the frequency and precise purpose of these executions. Were they primarily judicial sentences, or did they function more as ritualized entertainment under the guise of justice? Ancient writers differ. Some describe damnatio ad bestias as a penalty decreed for specific crimes. Others emphasize its role in mass spectacles tied to festivals and imperial celebrations. The evidence leaves open questions: how many individuals were killed in this manner over a given year? How decisions were made about who faced beasts and who faced other penalties, and how local variations shaped the practice. The silence of the record ensures that mystery remains around the daily mechanics of this form of execution. From a planetary perspective, the arena symbolizes how Rome transforms environments into instruments of authority. Amphitheaters, often built with stone quarried from distant regions, are placed at the heart of towns, their elliptical structures visible from far outside city walls. Into these artificial landscapes, Rome imports wild animals from desert savannas and jungles, turning global ecosystems into props of civic ritual. The contrast is stark: creatures born under the Saharan sun or Asian forests now roar under Italian skies, their struggles reshaped as a message of empire. Geography is collapsed into the sand of the arena, where human life is extinguished in the shadow of beasts that themselves are forced into alien theaters. For those condemned, death by beasts is not always instantaneous. Some accounts describe victims mauled slowly, sometimes rescued only to be killed again in staged reenactments. To heighten effect, criminals are bound to stakes tied in nets or smeared with substances to attract predators. In some cases, mythological scenes are reenacted with condemned individuals forced to play roles in which their real death mirrors legendary violence. The cruelty lies not only in the method, but in the layering of symbolism. The condemned body becomes both sacrifice and performance. At the same time, damnatio ad bestias is embedded in civic ritual. Executions are timed to festivals, military victories, or the inauguration of buildings, ensuring that the punishment is part of collective memory. Citizens attend as both audience and participants, shouting approval, demanding blood, or simply watching in silence as law fulfills its visible promise. The arena democratizes observation. Senators, plebeians, women, and children share in the sight, though their seating is strictly ordered by social rank. The condemned, stripped of identity, confront beasts under a gaze that mirrors Rome's hierarchies. For provincial cities, the arrival of beasts and spectacles affirms their place within imperial networks. Governors and magistrates sponsor shows, declaring loyalty to Rome and providing local populations with spectacles that echo the capital. The punishment thus serves two masters. It executes criminals while displaying imperial generosity, for the costs of beasts, hunters' transport, and construction are immense. Sponsorship of such events weaves punishment into the politics of favor and loyalty, binding provinces to the empire. Archaeological traces hint at the scale bones of lions and bears in Roman towns, inscriptions celebrating officials who funded spectacles, mosaics depicting hunters and condemned figures. Yet direct remains of those executed vanish quickly. Bodies consumed by animals leave little trace. This absence reinforces the intended message: the condemned are not meant to leave memory, only spectacle. In place of graves and monuments, their end is remembered through collective sight and imperial stonework. Even here, unresolved questions persist. To what extent did ordinary Romans view damnatio ad bestias as legitimate justice, and to what extent, as entertainment, did they distinguish between civic penalty and stage performance, or were the two inseparable in their minds? Modern categories of crime and theater may not apply neatly. For Rome, the act itself sufficed. The guilty are destroyed publicly. The community witnesses, and the empire affirms order. As with crucifixion, the details of frequency, variation, and meaning remain contested. On the largest scale, the arena turns punishment into a microcosm of empire. It concentrates people from many regions, animals from distant continents, architecture from massive quarries, and rituals from Roman law into a single sand-filled ellipse. The condemned body placed at the center is crushed not only by beasts, but by the weight of an entire system that merges justice, conquest, and memory. Each cry of the animal, each shout of the crowd, each decree read aloud by heralds echoes the empire's ability to bring the farthest lands and the most ordinary crimes into one ritual of control. Thus, damnatio ad bestias endures as one of the starkest examples of Roman punishment. It is not accidental violence, but carefully staged destruction embedded in civic calendars, provincial politics, and imperial pride. The condemned become nameless actors in a drama that affirms Rome's reach over nature and humanity alike. Seen in this way, the punishment is less about individual guilt and more about collective order, ensuring that law, spectacle, and empire are bound together before thousands of watching eyes. Fire and water executions occupy a peculiar space in the Roman repertoire of punishment, combining elemental symbolism with legal severity. While less common than crucifixion or exposure to beasts, these methods reveal the depth of Rome's concern with order, ritual, and the shaping of communal memory. The Roman world, grounded in religious traditions as much as in legal statutes, views elements such as fire and water not merely as physical forces, but as boundaries between purity and defilement, belonging and exclusion. To condemn a person through fire or water is to employ the very fabric of the cosmos in the service of civic discipline. Among the most striking of these punishments is the poena culae, the penalty of the sack imposed on those guilty of parricide, the killing of a parent or close relative. Ancient writers emphasize that this crime is seen as an attack not only on family, but on the order of the gods, since the household is the smallest unit of civic and religious life. The condemned is sewn into a leather sack along with animals, traditionally a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, then cast into water, often a river or sea. The fact is clear: parricide is so unnatural that ordinary burial or execution will not suffice. The guilty are removed from earth fire and air cast instead into the liminal space of water, where they disappear without trace. This ritualized death underscores that certain crimes demand punishments outside the human sphere, placing elements themselves in judgment. A lesser-known detail surfaces in variations of the poena culae. While the canonical list of animals appears in later legal codifications, earlier sources suggest differences in practice, with some versions including fewer animals or none at all. Practical difficulties in assembling the prescribed beasts may have led magistrates to adapt the ritual, yet the symbolism remains consistent. The offender is enclosed, denied ordinary human contact, and expelled into the fluid boundary between worlds. The sack itself becomes a microcosm of disorder creatures fighting within as the human culprit is crushed among them, then all engulfed by the river. The message reinforced across generations is that parricide dissolves the bonds of nature and thus merits dissolution into nature's elements. Scholars debate how frequently the poena culae was applied. Surviving sources offer only a handful of concrete cases, and some suggest that the elaborate description may have been more symbolic ideal than daily reality. Did Roman courts often enact this punishment, or did they preserve it as a fearsome possibility rarely used but deeply remembered legal texts of the later empire list it in detail, implying continuity, yet the paucity of specific examples leaves uncertainty? The ritual may have functioned as much in imagination as in practice, a looming threat that reinforced the sacredness of family bonds. Mystery persists in how consistently animals were included, how often rivers replaced seas, and how far provinces adopted the same formula. Beyond parricide, fire also plays a role in Roman execution. Burning alive is recorded as a penalty in certain religious offenses, such as for Vestal virgins found guilty of breaking their vows. Though in these cases the actual method is debated. Some accounts describe entombment rather than burning others. Note immolation. Later imperial legislation prescribes burning for crimes such as arson or treason, with variations depending on region and status. Fire associated with the hearth of Vesta and the sacrifices of the gods carries heavy symbolic weight. To die by fire is both purification and obliteration, a removal of pollution through flames that both consume and cleanse. Archaeological evidence is sparse, yet texts affirm the principle some crimes are so polluting that fire alone can expiate them. From a planetary vantage, these punishments show how Rome situates law within the larger rhythms of nature. Rivers such as the Tiber are not just waterways, but sacred boundaries, channels that link city and cosmos. To consign the guilty to the river is to let the element carry away pollution, restoring the balance of the civic body. Fire drawn from hearths and altars connects law to the sun's energy and to divine guardianship. By using these forces, Rome elevates punishment beyond human vengeance. It becomes cosmic correction, aligning society with universal order. The condemned body serves as offering consumed or absorbed by nature so that the community may endure. The psychological impact of such punishments lies in their ritual clarity. Unlike crucifixion, which exposes suffering for days, or damnatio ad bestias, which mingles death with entertainment, fire and water executions emphasize symbolism over duration. The sight of a sack carried to the river, the final plunge into current, the smoke of flames consuming a figure all communicate in silence that certain acts rupture the moral fabric too deeply for ordinary measures. Law here becomes liturgy, a performance of cosmic exclusion. Yet unresolved questions remain. Were these penalties enacted in provincial towns with the same ritual detail, or were they primarily Roman ideals preserved in legal texts? How often did communities witness the spectacle compared to how often they only heard of it? Were the animals always present in poena culae, or did the ritual simplify over time? Historians grapple with a mix of literary allusion, juristic commentary, and later codifications, uncertain how to reconcile them with sparse concrete records. The mystery underscores how much of Roman law operated as memory as well as action, preserving penalties as models even when their application was rare. On the empire's scale, these punishments contribute to a pattern. Each element of nature, earth, fire, water, air, can become a boundary of exclusion. Crucifixion uses wood and air, displaying the body against sky and road. Damnatio ad bestias employs earth's creatures, drawing beasts into the city's ritual. Fire and water consume and erase, closing the circle of elements. Rome thus weaves its law into the planet itself, ensuring that the natural order appears to cooperate with civic justice. Every element becomes a witness, every boundary a tool, every spectacle a reminder that Rome governs not only people, but the very forces that shape existence. Observers of such executions see more than a death. They see affirmation that family bonds are sacred, that pollution must be removed, that elements can judge where human courts alone cannot. In this way, fire and water punishments extend Roman law into the realm of cosmic drama. Though details and frequency may be uncertain, the memory of these acts endures as part of the cultural imagination, reminding each generation that to violate the deepest bonds is to be handed not to man, but to nature itself. The river carries away the sack flames consume the body, and silence returns, leaving behind the certainty that Rome has aligned itself once more with the order of gods and cosmos. Decimation of soldiers reveals a punishment that speaks not to the criminal outsider, but to the heart of Rome's military machine, a method designed to correct collective failure through ritualized terror. The word itself, derived from the Latin decimus, meaning tenth, describes the killing of one man in 10 from a disgraced unit selected by lot, beaten or stoned to death by his comrades, while the survivors are forced to endure shame, reduced rations, and the stigma of failure. It is a punishment not of individual crime, but of collective indiscipline applied when legions mutiny, desert, or collapse in battle. Roman armies are the backbone of the Republic and the Empire, and the cohesion of these forces is treated as a matter of life and death for the state. By striking within the ranks, commanders remind soldiers that their unity cannot be taken for granted, and that discipline stands above friendship, loyalty, or chance. The fact is well attested. Writers such as Livy, Plutarch, and Polybius describe episodes where generals, among them Crassus, after a defeat by Spartacus in 71 BCE, imposed decimation to reassert control. The mechanics are harsh but structured. Entire cohorts or larger units are assembled. Lots are drawn to choose the condemned, and the unlucky are executed before their fellows. The chosen method varies, sometimes bludgeoning with clubs, sometimes stoning, occasionally with swords. The rest are forced to watch, to participate, and to absorb the warning that discipline outweighs numbers. Decimation thus punishes all through the death of some, binding the unit together through shared fear and shame. A lesser-known detail emerges in the continuity of decimation into the imperial era, though applied rarely and often in modified forms. Evidence suggests that by the 1st century CE the practice is less common, perhaps because emperors feared that excessive cruelty might alienate professional soldiers whose loyalty underpinned imperial power. Yet inscriptions and scattered accounts confirm that versions of decimation persist, sometimes targeting smaller groups, sometimes replacing execution with humiliation and demotion. Even the threat of decimation suffices. Commanders invoke the possibility to restore obedience without always carrying it out. The specter of chance, the possibility that any man, guilty or innocent, might be chosen, remains the punishment's most powerful feature. The mystery for historians lies in frequency. Were decimations a regular feature of army life, or exceptional responses to crises? Ancient narratives tend to highlight dramatic examples, but silence surrounds ordinary campaigns. Some argue that decimation was rare, reserved for moments when authority teetered, while others suspect it may have been more common than texts suggest, especially in remote provinces where records are thin. Archaeology offers little help. Graves of soldiers tell nothing of whether death came by lot or battle. What remains clear is the tension between Roman pride in discipline and Roman anxiety over cruelty. Decimation hovers between the two, an ever-present possibility seldom clearly observed. At the planetary scale, decimation ties the fate of individual soldiers to the stability of empire. Legions march across deserts, rivers, mountains, and forests, and their cohesion sustains Rome's reach from Scotland to Mesopotamia. A single mutiny could unravel frontiers. A single collapse could invite invasion. By placing discipline above all else, Rome ensures that its armies act as a single organism, even if fear is the bond. The ritual of decimation transforms geography into a stage on some windswept plain in Gaul, in a scorched camp in Syria, in a swampy lowland near the Danube. Soldiers assemble under the eyes of commanders, draw lots, and watch comrades fall. The sky, the land, the marching roads all witness the restoration of order, a reminder that Rome cannot afford weakness where empire meets its edges. Decimation is also part of a larger Roman philosophy of military virtue. The army embodies disciplina, the ideal that obedience and order must prevail over impulse and self-interest. Victory requires not only weapons and numbers, but the will to hold formation, endure hardship, and suppress fear. By threatening every soldier equally, decimation erases distinctions of bravery or negligence. All are bound to the collective. The penalty therefore reinforces the idea that survival depends on solidarity and that disobedience, even by a few, can doom the many. In this sense, decimation is a mirror of Roman society, where individual rights yield to communal stability, where punishment teaches not only the guilty, but the watching crowd. The psychological weight is profound. To know that a commander might impose death at random instills a discipline deeper than commands shouted in battle. Soldiers carry that knowledge from campfires to battle lines, from one campaign to another. Fear of the enemy is rivaled by fear of their own standards, ensuring that order holds even under chaos. Yet the cruelty of the practice cannot be ignored, and ancient commentators themselves sometimes express horror at its extremity. This ambivalence hints at ongoing debates within Roman culture. How far can authority go before it destroys loyalty? Commanders tread a narrow line between deterrence and alienation. The continued reference to decimation across centuries suggests that whether used often or rarely, it remained embedded in the cultural imagination as the ultimate sanction against collective failure. From another angle, decimation reveals how Rome conceives of justice in military terms: impersonal, impartial, and absolute. By leaving selection to the lottery of lots, generals appear to surrender choice as though fate itself delivers judgment. The randomness makes the penalty unchallengeable. None can argue favoritism or bias, for all are equally exposed to chance. This blend of ritual, fate, and violence carries a message that transcends the battlefield. It shows that Rome accepts no weakness in the structures that defend it, that the army is not a collection of men, but a living entity where survival of the whole demands sacrifice of the part. The planetary resonance of decimation lies in how it reflects Rome's vast dependencies. From the limes along the Rhine to the deserts of Arabia, the empire relies on disciplined movement of soldiers, supplies, and commands. One faltering legion can leave an entire frontier vulnerable. Decimation assures not only that units obey, but that the wider system remains intact. In this sense, the punishment is less about justice than about survival, an act through which empire shields itself against collapse. The ritual of striking 1 in 10 reverberates through landscapes of conquest, embedding the memory of fear into every camp and march. Ultimately, Decimation illustrates the Roman capacity to transform even punishment into a tool of cohesion. By intertwining terror with order, Rome molds its soldiers into instruments of empire. The condemned beaten to death by comrades vanish into the dust of the camp, but the survivors carry forward the lesson, their steps measured on the roads that link provinces, their spears raised not only against enemies, but against the possibility of disobedience. It is this fusion of cruelty and discipline, of ritual and randomness, that makes decimation one of the most chilling punishments imagined by the Roman world. Erasing memory, the penalty known as damnatio memoriae, differs sharply from the bloody immediacy of crucifixion beasts or fire. It strikes after death, targeting not the body, but the name, the image, and the presence of an individual within the civic world. To condemn someone to the loss of memory is to declare that their life and deeds, once part of Rome's record, must be obliterated so thoroughly that future generations encounter only absence. This penalty is applied most often to emperors and high officials who fall from grace, those accused of tyranny, treason, or offenses so grave that the Senate or successor deems their memory intolerable. The fact is, clear inscriptions are chiseled away, faces on statues recut into new forms, coins recalled or overstruck, and public mention erased. What remains is a landscape of erasures, physical scars in stone that signal Rome's decision to rewrite its own history. One lesser-known detail lies in the creative reuse of materials once dedicated to condemned figures. Marble statues of disgraced emperors are not always destroyed outright. Instead, their faces are reshaped into new rulers or deities, their inscriptions retooled to honor successors, their monuments recycled into fresh forms. In this way, damnatio memoriae does not simply remove but transforms, turning past glory into raw material for new authority. Archaeological evidence across the empire shows traces of chisels, gouges where eyes or noses once stood, or blank panels where names once proclaimed power. Each scar is a record of removal, a silent testimony to the act of forgetting. Yet historians debate how absolute this forgetting ever was. In reality, the very act of erasure draws attention to what is being removed. Scratched inscriptions leave outlines that future readers can sometimes reconstruct, and altered statues reveal their original identities to the careful eye. The mystery remains: did Romans truly believe that memory could be destroyed, or was the ritual more symbolic, a statement of condemnation rather than an effective erasure? Sources differ, and the persistence of traces suggests that damnatio memoriae functioned less as obliteration than as public denunciation. By attempting to delete Rome, paradoxically ensured remembrance through absence, reminding viewers that authority itself could be judged and rewritten. On the planetary scale, this punishment shows how Rome embeds its legal and political order into the very fabric of landscapes and monuments. Temples, arches, milestones, and coins are not only functional objects, but carriers of identity, inscribing the presence of rulers across provinces and continents. When a name is erased, the alteration stretches from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria, creating a ripple of absence that spans thousands of kilometers. The empire speaks in unison. This person no longer exists in our civic memory. Geography itself is reshaped by deletion, as travelers encounter blank tablets where once letters announced decrees. In this way, damnatio memoriae operates not only in Rome, but across the entire world. Rome touches turning the empire into a coordinated archive of remembrance and forgetting. The mechanics of the penalty are both bureaucratic and symbolic. The Senate issues decrees of condemnation, local officials carry out erasures, artisans recut or replace statues, and scribes alter public records. Yet the act is also theatrical. Crowds may gather to witness the smashing of portraits or the removal of insignia. Inscriptions announcing victories or dedications suddenly display vacant spaces, and the community is reminded that power once exalted can collapse. Memory itself becomes a political battlefield where survival depends not only on achievements but on posthumous judgment. In this sense, Damnatio Memoriae reflects Rome's anxiety about tyranny and betrayal, its desire to ensure that civic identity remains untarnished. Lesser officials, too, may face erasure, especially if tied to disgraced rulers, but the penalty most powerfully marks emperors whose rule ends in scandal. The fate of Domitian after his assassination in 96 CE, or of Geta after his murder by Caracalla in 211 CE, shows how memory could be condemned, their images hacked out of reliefs, their names effaced from inscriptions. Yet the scars left behind still testify to their existence, complicating the intended forgetting. Scholars puzzle over the effectiveness of this act. Did ordinary citizens forget the condemned, or did the absence itself become a point of whispered memory? How did provinces interpret the order? Did they obey with zeal or preserve subtle reminders out of caution or loyalty? The unevenness of the evidence suggests variety. Some towns erased thoroughly, others incompletely. The mystery lingers in each gouged stone, reminding us that forgetting can never be total. From another perspective, Damnatio Memoriae aligns with Rome's larger use of monuments to shape collective identity. Just as arches and statues proclaim victories and virtues, so their removal proclaims disgrace. The empire speaks in positive and negative, in presence and absence alike. Law reaches beyond the living body into the persistence of name and image, making identity itself a subject of control. For Romans, this is no trivial matter to live on. In memory is a form of immortality, and to be erased is to die a second death, one that touches not only the self but descendants and associates. The penalty thus extends across generations, ensuring that shame endures. Planetary resonance emerges in the way this practice ties history to material remains. Across continents, stones are cut coins, recalled statues reworked. The labor required is immense, yet the symbolism matters more than efficiency. By commanding erasure across its territories, Rome demonstrates unity binding far-flung provinces into a single act of forgetting. The sun rises over ruined faces and amphitheaters of North Africa, blank inscriptions in Gallic. Towns altered reliefs in Asia Minor, and each speaks the same silent decree: this person is unworthy of memory. Such uniformity across distance reinforces the sense of a shared civic body defined as much by who is excluded as by who is honored. In contemplating Damnatio Memoriae, one sees a punishment at once chilling and subtle. No blood is spilled, no beasts roar, no fire consumes. Yet the impact cuts deeply. Identity itself is targeted honor, stripped legacy undone. The condemned is denied the future, condemned to be nameless in a world where names are carved in stone. And yet the paradox persists. By erasing Rome ensures traces that survive, making the absence itself visible. This duality captures the complexity of Roman justice. It seeks absolute control, yet reveals its limits in the very scars it leaves behind. In the long view, these erasures shape how we understand the empire today. Archaeologists and historians reconstruct stories from the voids, learning who was condemned by reading what was meant to vanish. Rome, in trying to silence memory, preserved evidence of its own anxieties and politics. The punishment thus endures, not only as an act of power, but as a record of fragility, showing how deeply Rome feared memory itself. Across the empire's vast landscapes, from the basalt stones of Syria to the marble of Italy, The traces of erased names remind us that even in forgetting Rome could not escape remembrance. To the mines and quarries, the punishment of damnatio ad metalla drags the condemned far from city streets and civic rituals into landscapes of stone darkness and exhaustion. Unlike crucifixion or execution by beasts, which conclude life quickly and publicly, condemnation to the mines or quarries unfolds slowly, often ending in death through toil, deprivation, and injury. The Roman state and private contractors rely heavily on mineral resources, gold, silver, lead, iron, and marble, and the labor to extract them is harsh. Convicts, war captives, and the enslaved fill the subterranean galleries, working under conditions that transform punishment into prolonged erasure. The fact is clear: Roman legal sources and Christian writers alike attest that condemnation to the mines is a sentence considered equivalent to death. Jurists note it as a penalty for the humiliores, the lower classes, while citizens of higher standing typically face exile or fines instead. Once sent ad metalla, individuals are stripped of civic identity, shackled, and dispatched to remote districts such as the mines of Spain, the quarries of Egypt, or the silver veins of Dalmatia. There, they live in barracks or caves with minimal sustenance, forced to labor in darkness, and thus cut off from the rhythms of ordinary community. A lesser-known detail lies in the organization of these penal labor camps. Inscriptions from mining regions in Spain and Sardinia reveal the presence of military units assigned to guard convicts and regulate extraction. The work is not random suffering, but structured exploitation. Convicts dig shafts, carry baskets of ore, smelt metal, or haul stone blocks. In the great marble quarries of Pentelicus or Proconnesus, prisoners carve the very material that later becomes temples and imperial monuments. Thus the condemned contribute unwillingly to the grandeur of Rome, their punishment embedded in the fabric of the city itself. Every column or paving stone may carry silent testimony to those who cut it under chains. Scholars debate how extensive this system of penal labor truly was. Ancient texts emphasize its horror, but was it common punishment or relatively rare? Archaeology shows evidence of large-scale mining operations, yet whether convicts formed the majority of the labor force remains uncertain. Some argue that free-wage laborers and enslaved workers dominated, with convicts supplementing them in times of need. Others suggest that the mines absorbed vast numbers of criminals and prisoners of war, effectively turning punishment into an engine of imperial resource extraction. The lack of detailed records leaves the scale unresolved, though the consistency of references confirms that the sentence existed and was dreaded. On a planetary scale, the punishment ties law to the earth itself. Mines sink into hillsides, quarries scar mountains, and the empire's appetite for metal and stone reshapes landscapes across continents. The condemned descend beneath sunlight into galleries where oil lamps flicker and air turns stale. They breathe dust that scars lungs, hear the clatter of picks and chains, and feel time stretch into indistinct seasons. Above-ground carts carry ore to smelters' stone blocks, to ships materials that travel along roads and rivers to Rome, Constantinople, or provincial capitals. In this way, the punishment integrates convicts into the empire's material bloodstream, binding their suffering to the monuments and currency that sustain imperial identity. The psychological dimension of damnatio ad metalla lies in its erasure of individuality. Whereas crucifixion or arena death makes the condemned highly visible, the mines conceal them. Out of sight, their existence diminishes into silence. For contemporaries, the sentence effectively equals death, since few return. Christian texts later describe confessors and martyrs condemned to the mines, emphasizing both the severity of the punishment and its role in shaping communal memory. The image of chained believers in dark galleries singing or enduring illustrates how punishment also intersects with faith and resistance. For the state, however, the goal is not martyrdom, but utility and deterrence. The mines consume lives while enriching the treasury. Another unresolved question is how long those condemned typically survived. Accounts suggest that death could come quickly through collapse, accident, or disease, yet some may have endured years integrated into the grim rhythm of extraction. Did any ever escape or complete a term? The silence of sources denies clarity. What is evident is that the mines function as a liminal space between life and death, where existence continues in degraded form, cut off from community, stripped of rights, and consumed by the earth's hunger. From the empire's perspective, the sentence embodies efficiency. The same legal system that expels criminals also supplies labor for critical industries. Punishment and production merge. Instead of spending resources on executions, Rome channels offenders into zones where their strength, however unwilling, feeds the empire's infrastructure. Roads paved with stone, aqueducts lined with marble, coins stamped with imperial images, all may carry traces of forced labor. Thus, damnatio ad metalla is not only penal, but economic binding discipline to empire's material ambitions. On the largest scale, this punishment reveals Rome's reach into both human and planetary resources. Mountains are quarried veins of ore, emptied forests felled for smelters. Human lives fuel this extraction, their labor turned invisible in the grandeur of temples and statues. For the condemned, the mine is a grave without ceremony, yet for Rome it is a pillar of wealth and authority. Geography itself becomes a participant in punishment. Hills collapse, valleys fill with spoil, rivers run dark with silt. The earth bears scars of law as surely as stone inscriptions bear its decrees. Yet even in their silence, the mines remind us of the tension in Roman justice between spectacle and disappearance. Some penalties expose bodies to crowds, others hide them in distant shadows. Both serve the same purpose: to assert that the state has ultimate power over life, memory, and labor. The condemned in quarries unseen yet essential embody the paradox of Roman law, absent from community yet omnipresent in its monuments. They are erased as persons, but endure as stone blocks, paving slabs, and gleaming statues. The continuity of empire thus rests on invisible suffering, punishment fused with construction. The legacy of damnatio ad metalla survives less in texts than in landscapes. Across Spain, Sardinia, and the Balkans, abandoned shafts and quarries remain, silent testaments to the labor that once sustained Rome. Archaeologists trace tool marks in stone, collapsed galleries, slag heaps by rivers. Though names are lost, the punishment's presence is written into geology. Each scar on the earth recalls how law and empire converge to consume human strength in pursuit of permanence. In contemplating this penalty, one sees not only cruelty, but also the vast machinery of Rome, a system that absorbs lives into its monuments, that binds punishment to economy, that turns suffering into marble temples and minted coin. Damnatio ad metalla, therefore, stands as one of the most chilling punishments imagined, not because it destroys swiftly, but because it erases slowly, invisibly, and completely, until what remains of the condemned is not memory, but stone. Exile and loss of citizenship represent punishments that strike not through pain or spectacle, but through removal from the civic body. To be sent away from Rome, stripped of the rights and honors that define belonging, is to lose identity itself. While crucifixion and the mines consume the body, exile consumes the person's place in society. In the Roman world, citizenship is more than a legal category. It is a shield that shapes every encounter with law, commerce, and ritual. To be deprived of it or to be forced across seas into foreign soil is to be severed from the network of protections that sustain Roman life. The fact is clear: exile exists in several forms, from relegatio, a temporary banishment often to a specified island, to deportatio, a harsher and permanent removal, sometimes accompanied by the loss of property and status. Citizens of standing might receive exile in place of death, a penalty that preserves life but denies home. Famous cases illustrate the point. Cicero himself is exiled in 58 BCE after conflict with political rivals, sent to Macedonia until recalled. Ovid is relegated by Augustus to Tomis on the Black Sea, a punishment that lasts until his death. In both examples, exile is both survival and devastation, leaving bodies intact but social presence undone. A lesser-known detail lies in the geography of exile. Islands in the Mediterranean, such as Gyros, Rhodes, or Sardinia, serve as destinations for the relegated. These places are not chosen at random. They are carefully selected to ensure isolation while still allowing surveillance. Exiles live in landscapes of harsh winds, limited markets, and restricted contact with the mainland. The geography itself becomes punishment, turning natural boundaries of sea and distance into walls more effective than stone. For those deported further afield to frontier provinces or remote towns, the exile becomes part of the empire's human circulation, scattered figures of disgrace living in far corners under watchful eyes. Scholars debate the frequency and severity of exile. Was it primarily a tool for elite politics, sparing lives while neutralizing rivals, or was it applied more widely across classes? Legal texts show clear categories, but practice may have varied with time and place. The mystery deepens with the fate of exiles. Some returned after political changes, others remained forgotten, their names surviving only in passing references. How communities treated exiles, whether with hostility, curiosity, or indifference, remains unclear, for the sources rarely speak from the perspective of those who watch strangers arrive. What is certain is that exile is as much about memory as distance, removing a figure from the civic narrative while preserving their physical survival. On the planetary scale, exile demonstrates Rome's use of geography itself as an instrument of law. The sea becomes a barrier, mountains and rivers define boundaries, and distance transforms a citizen into an absence. The empire's vastness provides the stage. An official can be sent across hundreds of kilometers beyond familiar dialects, climates, and customs to dwell where loyalty is uncertain and surveillance constant. From the hot winds of North Africa to the frozen shores of the Black Sea, Rome's geography is enlisted as jailer. Exile thus weaves punishment into the very expanse of empire, using space as much as soldiers to enforce order. The psychological weight of exile lies in disconnection. A citizen accustomed to the noise of the forum, the rituals of temples, and the circles of patronage finds themselves suddenly in alien surroundings. Letters may still travel, but slowly, uncertainly. Reputation withers as rivals at home seize opportunities. Exile cuts the threads of social life more cruelly than chains, for the body remains free while the self dissolves. Ovid's poems from Tomis illustrate the pain of distance, the unfamiliar language of locals, the harsh winters, the sense of being forgotten by Rome. Through such testimony, we glimpse how exile destroys by absence rather than by blows. Another unresolved aspect concerns loss of citizenship, a penalty that may accompany exile or stand alone. To be deprived of citizen status is to lose rights to marry legally, to own property in recognized form, to appeal in courts. It is a civic death, one that leaves the body alive, but the legal person erased. Some continue to live in Rome under this shadow visible but excluded a presence without recognition. Scholars debate how often this was imposed and whether it primarily targeted elites guilty of treason or broader classes in times of repression. The silence of records obscures the lived reality, but the principle is clear: Rome can unmake as well as make a citizen. From a wider perspective, exile and loss of citizenship reveal how Roman justice extends beyond violence into identity. The community is not only physical, but symbolic, defined by who belongs and who does not. By sending one away, Rome reaffirms the boundaries of civic life, teaching that protection is conditional honor, fragile belonging, revocable. The punishment's power lies in its subtlety: a man alive yet absent, a citizen breathing yet dead in law. For the empire, this is efficient; for the condemned, it is devastating. Planetary resonance lies in the repetition of these acts across continents. From island to island, from frontier town to provincial village, scattered figures of exile mark the edges of Roman authority. They are living reminders that empire governs not only through legions and executions, but through absence and removal. The sea, the mountains, the deserts all serve as instruments of law, binding geography into punishment. Across these vast distances, the message is uniform: citizenship is a gift, and Rome can revoke it. In contemplating exile, one sees a punishment quieter than death, yet deeply chilling. The condemned are erased from memory, displaced into landscapes that echo their disgrace, left to survive in alien surroundings. They may write, complain, adapt, or vanish, but all share the same fate: separation from the civic body. Rome, in turn, strengthens itself by pruning its community, ensuring that its identity remains intact. Exile and loss of citizenship thus stand among the most unsettling punishments, not because they destroy the body, but because they destroy belonging, the very fabric of what it means to live as Roman. Public humiliation and spectacle form another layer in the Roman system of punishment, where shame is wielded as effectively as sword or chain. Unlike crucifixion, which removes life, or exile, which removes presence, humiliation targets honor, displaying the condemned before the community in ways that mark them as degraded. Rome is a society acutely sensitive to reputation, rank, and dignity, and to be shamed in public is to be stripped of what binds one to peers and patrons. Punishment becomes not only correction, but a ritual of degradation, ensuring that all who watch learn the boundaries of acceptable conduct. The fact is, clear flogging, parading, and exposure are used widely, especially against the humiliores. Criminals may be whipped in the Forum, marched through streets in chains, or displayed in markets with placards announcing their crimes. Such practices are recorded in legal sources and described by ancient authors who note the spectacle of disgrace. Public humiliation is not a minor penalty, but a central instrument of control, reinforcing the hierarchy of status by reminding all that honor can be taken away at the magistrate's command. A lesser-known detail lies in the ritual of the furca, a wooden yoke or fork-shaped beam placed across the shoulders of the condemned, forcing them to carry it through streets. This punishment, inflicted on soldiers for desertion or theft, and on slaves for various offenses, transforms the body into a visible sign of guilt. The condemned stoops under the weight, unable to raise head or hands, reduced to a walking display of shame. Inscriptions and literary references confirm the practice, though archaeological evidence is scarce. The furca dramatizes subordination. The offender is bent under a burden, paraded as spectacle, and reminded of their loss of dignity. Scholars debate how far public humiliation penetrated elite society. Citizens of high rank are generally spared corporal punishment, but certain political disgraces amount to public exposure. In another form, senators expelled from the House. Generals paraded in chains during triumphs, defeated rivals stripped of honors. The mystery lies in how consistently the lower classes faced these spectacles, and whether humiliation was seen as entertainment or solemn lesson. Crowds may jeer, laugh, or remain silent, but sources rarely capture the voices of ordinary Romans reacting to such displays. The purpose seems clear, yet the emotional register of the audience remains uncertain. On the planetary scale, humiliation turns urban space into a stage of discipline. Forums, marketplaces, and amphitheaters become theaters where guilt is proclaimed. Streets lined with spectators magnify the effect, ensuring that punishment reaches beyond the offender to touch all who witness. Across the empire, from provincial towns to the capital, similar practices recur, binding communities together through shared acts of seeing. Geography is enlisted into the penalty. The public square, the main road, the city gate, all places where the flow of life is thickest, become temporary courts where shame is enacted. The condemned body is thus woven into the landscape of daily movement, its degradation impossible to ignore. The psychological impact is profound. In a culture where honor determines one's ability to speak trade or marry, to be shamed in public is to be silenced and excluded. The lash tears flesh, but the gaze of neighbors tears status. Once flogged in the forum, a person carries marks visible not only on skin, but in memory, a stigma harder to erase than scars. Humiliation thus continues long after the punishment ends, haunting reputation and future opportunities. For Rome, this permanence is the point. Disgrace outlives the act, ensuring that punishment resonates through years. Another unresolved question concerns the overlap of punishment and entertainment. When criminals are paraded before games or whipped in the arena, do audiences experience the event as justice or spectacle? Roman culture blurs the line, embedding penalty within festivals, games, and processions. This fusion suggests that punishment is not only corrective, but celebratory, affirming communal identity through the visible exclusion of offenders. Yet the degree of cruelty or levity with which crowds responded remains hidden from us. From another perspective, public humiliation connects to broader Roman rituals of triumph and procession. Just as generals display spoils and captives in parades, so magistrates display criminals. The logic is similar. The body on display signifies victory, whether over foreign enemies or domestic disorder. Punishment thus mirrors conquest, reinforcing Rome's narrative of control both inside and outside its borders. Even the smallest parade of a chained thief echoes the grand triumph of an emperor. Both transform bodies into symbols of authority. On the empire-wide scale, humiliation also reveals how Rome economizes punishment. Not every offense merits death, but every offense must be seen. By making guilt visible, the state saves resources while preserving deterrence. A flogging in the forum costs less than an execution in the arena, but may achieve similar effect. The punishment is therefore practical as well as symbolic, aligning efficiency with order. Cities scattered from Gaul to Judea replicate these acts, ensuring consistency across cultures. Punishment is always public, always instructive, always bound to spectacle. In contemplating public humiliation, one sees the Roman genius for weaving law into daily life. Street squares and theaters are not only places of commerce and leisure, but also sites of correction. The condemned body becomes a temporary monument of disorder, reminding all who pass of boundaries not to be crossed. Unlike statues which honor and endure, these living monuments of shame pass quickly, yet linger in memory. The paradox is striking by lowering offenders before all Rome elevates its own authority, proving that it can command not only life and death, but honor itself. Ultimately, public humiliation demonstrates the breadth of Roman punishment. It shows that justice is not confined to courts or prisons, but lived out in streets and plazas in front of neighbors and strangers. The punishment does not vanish with the moment. It clings to memory, reshaping identity. In a society where appearance defines worth, to be exposed as guilty is to carry exile within one's own skin. Thus, humiliation, though less bloody than crucifixion, is no less chilling, for it ensures that disgrace outlasts pain, binding the condemned to a lifetime of remembered shame. Treason, tyranny, and the empire's control mark the upper end of Roman punishment, where law and politics converge most visibly. Unlike penalties for theft or desertion, punishment for crimes against the state carries weight beyond the individual, for it concerns the very survival of civic order. To betray the empire, to plot against emperors, or to threaten Rome's unity is to strike at the foundation of its authority. The responses are severe, ranging from execution to confiscation of estates, from exile to the destruction of memory, and each serves as a reminder that loyalty to Rome is not optional, but absolute. The fact is, well-documented treason trials expand dramatically under the Principate as the crime of maestas, injury to the majesty of the Roman people or its rulers, becomes a broad legal category. What begins in the Republic as a charge against those who undermine the dignity of the state develops into a tool for emperors to suppress rivals, silence dissent, and reinforce their authority. Under Tiberius, for example, accusations of maestas proliferate, targeting senators, poets, and even ordinary citizens whose words or actions are judged disloyal. The penalty is often death, accompanied by confiscation of property that enriches the treasury. In this way, treason becomes not only a political weapon, but an economic engine, redistributing wealth while eliminating opposition. A lesser-known detail lies in the treatment of the condemned's family. Roman law extends punishment beyond the individual in cases of treason, seizing estates, removing honors, and sometimes barring descendants from public office. The disgrace is hereditary, designed to erase entire lineages from future influence. In this way, punishment for treason cuts across generations, teaching that loyalty is a bond not only of the present, but of the future. Inscriptions and literary testimonies confirm that fear of such penalties shapes the behavior of elite families, compelling caution in speechwriting and alliances. The political climate itself becomes an extension of punishment, for suspicion alone may suffice to ruin reputations. Scholars debate how far accusations of treason reflect genuine threats versus imperial paranoia. Some cases involve actual conspiracies, such as the Pisonian conspiracy against Nero in 65 CE, but many others appear to be the result of informers seeking favor or emperors tightening control. The mystery lies in discerning where law ends and politics begins. Was maestas primarily a genuine category of crime, or was it a flexible instrument of imperial dominance? The record shaped by senatorial historians, often hostile to emperors, offers glimpses, but not certainty. What is clear is that treason trials instill fear throughout the upper classes, making words themselves dangerous, silence safer than frankness. On a planetary scale, punishment for treason reflects the empire's vast need for cohesion. Rome governs not only Italy, but distant provinces from Britain to Mesopotamia, and its stability depends on loyalty to a central figure. To threaten that figure is to threaten the empire's coherence. Executions for treason, damnatio memoriae against fallen emperors, and the erasure of names from monuments all function as signals sent across the Mediterranean world. The empire speaks with one voice: betrayal is annihilation. In this way, punishment is broadcast across provinces, binding diverse peoples to a single standard of loyalty. The mechanics of treason trials reveal the fusion of law and performance. Accusations are heard in the Senate or imperial court, informers present evidence, and verdicts are announced publicly. Condemnations often include ritual elements, names erased from record statues, toppled estates sold. Crowds may witness executions or parades of disgraced figures. By embedding treason trials in public rituals, Rome transforms political control into shared memory. Every witness learns that words, gestures, and alliances carry consequences that extend beyond private life. The psychological impact is profound. For elites, treason charges create a climate of constant vigilance. Speech is measured, friendships, calculated, ambitions restrained. Even poets hesitate, their verses scrutinized for offense. The fear is not only of death, but of erasure, of losing place in civic life, of family names struck from honor. For ordinary citizens, the spectacle of treason trials affirms that emperors are beyond challenge, that the empire itself is embodied in a single figure whose safety is the safety of all. Punishment thus reinforces ideology, binding personal survival to imperial loyalty. Another unresolved question concerns how provinces perceive these acts. Did distant communities understand the subtleties of senatorial politics, or did they simply see the message that disloyalty means death? Archaeological traces, erased inscriptions, altered statues suggest that the latter sufficed. A provincial passerby seeing a name chiseled out on a dedication stone would know that authority shifts, that loyalty is enforced, that memory itself bends to Rome's will. Whether they grasped the politics mattered less than that they understood the warning. From another perspective, treason punishments echo Rome's larger pattern of spectacle. Just as criminals are crucified by roads and thieves paraded in forums, so emperors and senators are punished in public ways that extend their disgrace across geography. The difference is scale. Punishment for treason resonates not only in one town, but across the empire, reshaping coins, monuments, and records. The condemned are not only killed, they are systematically erased, their presence rewritten. The empire proves it governs time as well as space, controlling what future generations will remember. On the largest scale, treason punishments demonstrate the fragility of power in Rome. Even emperors are not immune. Caligula, Domitian Commodus, and others are killed by conspirators, then condemned posthumously by the state. The system that enforces loyalty can turn against rulers themselves, proving that the same tools of erasure apply at the top. Law and punishment thus serve both emperor and senate depending on circumstance, weaving a web of fear and uncertainty that preserves order at the cost of security. For the condemned, treason is the most terrifying of charges, for it annihilates not only life, but legacy. Families lose estates, names vanish from stone, memory is twisted into infamy. For Rome, this is the point: treason cannot be treated as ordinary crime, for it strikes at empire itself. Punishment must therefore be total, extending across bodies, families, monuments, and records. The empire asserts that its continuity outweighs all else, and that no individual, however powerful, stands above its authority. Ultimately, punishment for treason reveals Rome's deepest truth: law is inseparable from power, and power inseparable from survival. By criminalizing disloyalty, by making memory itself vulnerable, Rome ensures that empire endures through fear as much as through loyalty. Across continents, from erased inscriptions in Africa to altered statues in Asia Minor, the same message resonates: Rome commands life, death, and remembrance. In this way, treason trials and punishments serve as the empire's final safeguard, the chilling proof that authority reaches not only into courts and arenas, but into the permanence of memory itself.